Welcome to the Career Wanderlust podcast, your compass for new career horizons. Today, we are talking with Sylvie Tongco. Sylvie is a senior level communication strategist who has navigated the evolving tech landscape with purpose and adaptability. Currently a VP of corporate communications, Sylvie has become a trusted advisor to the C suite. From leading communication strategy for Five9, a billion-dollar public AI company, to executive communications leadership at Genesis and heading up communications for Celigent Marketing Cloud, Sylvie successfully leads global initiatives for leading tech brands while consistently demonstrating the power of authentic messaging. Her experience spans both agency and in house environments, giving her a unique insight into how communication strategies evolve from both perspectives. From her early agency days at Atomic PR, working with venture capital clients, to her role as PR manager at mobile gaming company Storm 8, Sylvie brings a wealth of experience across varied industries and communications challenges. And I'm really excited to learn more. Sylvie, thank you for joining us on the Career Wonderlist podcast.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
You have excelled in your career. You've advanced through the ranks quickly. You've started an agency, you moved into in-house. I would love to know if there's any advice or belief that you found that has helped you the most throughout your career.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I actually shared one of the pieces of advice that I received early in my career recently to celebrate International Women's Day in March. And it's
Oh,
something that I still, to this day have to keep reminding myself sometimes, even almost like 20 years later. I was working on the agency side, and it was after a meeting, actually, one of our clients who were literal rocket scientists, right? And their offices were in NASA. This was the mid 2000s. And after the meeting, I found myself sharing with our founder, my manager at that time, that I felt super intimidated during that
Mm,
meeting because of just brain power, right? In that
right.
room and the knowledge that everybody had. We were talking about semantic technology. And it was my first tech PR job. I was like 26 or 27 years old and no PhD or anything of that type of science in
Yeah.
my background. And my boss turned to me, like, Sylvie, like, you should never let anybody intimidate you, right?
Mm,
Because they're at that point, like they're not really smarter than you. They simply had more information about a specific topic of what we were talking about. And the fact that you were in the room and being asked to give them your advice. And at that time, I had about 4 years experience, right, in comms. And that's 4 years more than these scientists. And so she advised me that I should just learn to ask questions and, just get more information about any topic. And to this day, of course, like when I posted that, I tagged Tara Barbara Riker in my post because it's so meaningful, even as a woman today in tech, right? Like we don't have like necessarily the science background sometimes, but that is the value that we provide and deliver is distilling that information. So, every time I get intimidated by topics, I'll ask the questions. Maybe it's a stupid question, but there are no stupid questions, just to learn. So,
I completely agree. I love this so much on so many different levels. I mean, yes, we often tend to not elevate our own knowledge, if you will. It's like we almost the things that we do know, because we know it, we think that everyone else might know it, or we don't like we're not giving ourselves the credit and the credence that our knowledge has, right? And so we often do that, especially when faced with different topics or industries that, like you said, are very science driven or very driven in a way that we're not aware of. And I love what your boss said personally. And I thought that's brilliant. They're not smarter than you. They just happen to know more about this particular topic at this moment. And that is something that we can all learn. We can all become more educated. And really, when we take that pride in what we do know and then ask all of the questions to get the information needed to bring the best value that we can bring, that is where magic happens, right? And so often we will hold ourselves back from that. And so this advice is so important on so many levels. Now, have you been practicing this consistently since then?
I try to, right? Like it's easy, it's easy to be intimidated in a lot of meetings, especially as
Right.
women, right? Like
It really
there's you're
is.
always like either the only one or one of two. And so I
Mhm.
try my best. And obviously through the years, as you've gained more confidence being more senior, that's definitely easier. But I always ask questions and maybe, sometimes it gets annoying, but that is how you kind of like get to the bottom of a story, right? Or something that you want to tell. So
Right. Well,
yeah.
and it's an important topic, how to feel comfortable with your seat at that table, right? And I mean, this story and advice is brilliant actually in helping people in that aspect. Is there anything else that you found has helped you through the years become more comfortable in that seat?
I think just preparation, right? Every time you go into a meeting, like 5, 10 minutes before, if without the back-to-back meetings, you have to look at your calendar and just prepare. I'm a preparer myself, so I like to know what I'm getting into. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, but even if it's just scanning certain things 5 minutes before a meeting really would help, even if it's ad hoc sometimes, right? I think preparation definitely give you a lot more confidence too in like tackling whatever it may be.
Right. And, all of the AI that we're learning, I just learned this new preparation tool, if you will, for meetings that I'm really excited about using. I've been using the projects in AI for my projects and for things that I work on. And someone had just suggested that, like, when you have a meeting with someone, if you have an important meeting, create a project and then add like the company's website, the LinkedIn profiles of the people you're meeting with, all of the notes, like anything that you have, add it all into the project and then you can ask AI, is there anything that I'm missing or whatever prompts you want? Like, what questions would be great to discuss here? Are there any insight? I mean, whatever. I just found this really interesting to use for important meetings to come up with some like
Oh,
new
I would
talking
love.
points.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
with any that I think that's also a helpful tool, right? Listen, especially in XComs, executive communications specifically, when you are preparing your executives or for an interview, right? We always do briefing sheets. Everybody in PR and comms knows that. And so that would be a helpful tool. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing all the new things coming out. So,
for sure.
I always love a story because I find we learn so much from stories. Is there anything that's happened to you in your career that actually turned into an impactful lesson for you? And it might help other people to hear this story for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's been so many lessons, right, throughout the years. And I was actually thinking about this a few hours ago. And I think it's easy to always hone in on learnings that, about getting ahead or getting a promotion or a raise, right, or negotiating for a better salary. But I think actually one of the biggest and most impactful lessons that I myself have experienced, maybe I want to say it's like 7 or 8 years ago, had nothing to do with any of that. I mean, it had salary, as part of it, but I was in between roles and I took some time off after getting married and traveling with my husband then. So obviously when we got back from our honeymoon, I wanted to get back into looking for a job. And there was a role for a director of comms that popped up and, super interesting company. I knew a couple of people there, but then in the process of negotiating, I felt like they had 0 flexibility on the salary. They were like,
Mm,
"Usually it's a starting point, right?" But I'm like, "You know what? It's fine." It was a yellow flag, but I felt it was an interesting role, interesting people. And so I took the job and it was exciting. So within a couple of months, that was not the only area where there was a little bit of a yellow flag, right?
cool.
And so I think a couple of months in, there was this big project that the marketing team was working on, basically, which is a report that they do, the biggest report that they do every year. As you know, like when it comes to like original research that you have to publish and print and all of that, there's a long lead time, right? And
Mhm.
so it goes through a lot of cycles of reviews through leadership and everything. And so the team actually had to hit like a specific deadline for publish. And so everybody's working round the clock pretty much. And at
Yes.
that time, one of the last kind of like reviewers within the executive team was traveling. And we had a deadline a day and a half later for print for the design and everything. And she had to like review all of the copy. And so we flew back at around maybe like 3 p.m. that afternoon. And at that time, I think there was some travel in Europe. And just point blank, she says, "I can't look at this tonight because I am going to the opera with my brother." And so all of us were like taken aback. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, everybody was like trying to like get this to bed and everything. But at that point, I think like two things actually for me in that kind of like time frame, right? Like I was thinking like, oh my God, how can they just say that? Right. Like after all of us were killing ourselves trying to put this to bed. But I actually now looking back, one, it's boundaries, right? Like,
Mhm.
yes, we've got these self-imposed deadlines and, we've got printers waiting in the wings and all of that. But at the end of the day, you have to have like set aside that time for you and yourself. That was one. And then but at that time, at that moment, I was just like, "Oh my gosh," like, I felt like there was a little bit of a, "Okay, because you're a senior leader, that means you're held to a different standard," and all of us
Mhm.
can just kind of like, "Okay, well, I guess we have to push everything back," and so there was kind of like that, back and forth. But I
Hmm.
think the lesson for me there is two things, right? One is like trust your gut. It ended up like I didn't work there for very long. I actually gave my notice within a couple of months because it was just not the right culture fit for me, just based
Yeah.
on not just that experience, but just overall like how they worked. But also trusting your gut, right? Like
Yes.
I had yellow flags along the way, but I second guessed myself and maybe, just kind of thinking, oh, I needed a job, like I'm just got married. I should probably get back into working. And I think if I had trusted my gut from the beginning, then it wouldn't have happened. But I thought that that was like a really big lesson, especially to this day too, right? Like I think no opportunity is worth compromising just overall your health and your mental well-being, but also being able to have that boundary. I keep looking back at that in her, she was just so like, I can't do it tonight. So those were, I think, like two valuable lessons that I learned from that experience.
Yeah. I love how they kind of intersperse there. And how, I mean, you can have different takeaways from the same kind of experience, right?
For sure.
And listening to those yellow flags is really important. I mean, look, there's a lot of situations like that. And life is too short to be in a position where you are unhappy or it's not the right fit for you. And so often people will stay in those positions that are not the right fit for them for way too long. And I always feel like you lose out twice when you do that. I mean, you can't always just quit a job. Completely understand that. We
Absolutely.
have different responsibilities, we have different things we need to do. So, but while you have the job, you can continuously look for something new. You can keep your eyes open, you can do all of the steps that you need to find something new. But when you're stuck in something that you're unhappy with, it's like you lose twice. It's not only are you unhappy in what you're doing, but all of that time that could have been put into something that is making you happy is being taken away and focused in a different area. And so I've found that when you're able to eliminate the things making you unhappy and open up that space, it's able to be filled with all of the great things. So really the best advice is yes, if you have those yellow flags, it's time to start looking. It's time to start making those changes. You can keep your job, but you can find something else in the meantime. And then I love the boundaries thing too, because look, that's something that a lot of us don't learn until later on in life as well, right? I mean,
Absolutely. And I think once again, like not just because of imposter syndrome or whatever, but like it comes with the territory, right? Like in tech, especially super fast paced, you always feel like there's that deadline you have to get to and it needs to be done right now. But there are certain things where, of course, everything's important. But
mhm,
if it's not like a real, true like deadline, then we need to be able to also, prioritize ourselves and be able to function well, right? In order to do our jobs well. So,
absolutely.
yeah,
And it's not something we're really taught either, in general. And so it is something that we need to learn and pay attention to because boundaries are what give us the ability to live our best lives generally.
for sure.
So,
And give the best
yes.
to our, yeah, whatever we're doing.
Exactly, exactly. So I love that example. And I think it is a great example because so often we have that dichotomy, right, between the younger and the more senior as well, because often you don't learn that lesson until you do some growing. I can think of my own self. I mean, boundaries were not something that I knew a lot about. And so now I'm really grateful for them. And try to talk to younger people about how although a lot of younger people I would say are learning more about boundaries consistently than a lot of us were taught back in the day.
Oh, for sure. And I think in some ways, like the TikTok generation or the younger, there's a lot to learn, but for all of us too from them, right? Like, 'cause I feel like they have
Absolutely.
taken a little bit more control over their time and what they want to do in some ways. And so,
Yep.
um, there's definitely that balance. Yeah.
Oh, they're redefining. They're absolutely redefining the whole culture of corporate America, if you ask me. Slowly,
Yeah, for
slowly
sure.
but surely. It's really interesting. So now what about career challenges? Because we all have big career challenges in our life. Is there something that you've experienced that you were able to overcome that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, obviously, I keep talking about imposter syndrome and just like it's just so fresh, right? Like in my mind, just in general, when it comes
Right.
to like women in tech and just overall the feeling of being marginalized, or sometimes like whether it's like your younger self or your older self, right? And so many years ago, I had this particular experience again, like, just I think the differences in that when you're working in house versus an agency, just the differences in the personalities and the leadership that you come across, right? So for me, there was a moment in my career where you kind of like look around and you do realize, you're one of a few, right? Like sometimes in the room, it's just me as a woman in minority and, in my early 20s. And I think there's that age bracket when you're young, and then they feel like, okay, you're too junior to be giving me advice. And then, of course,
Mm,
now we feel that ageism also as you get older. But I recall early in my career, as one of the directors in one of our clients, which was in storage security, right? We've just finished a briefing with the media. And then, of course, after that, you typically give some feedback and advice for the next round. I remember that client particularly called my boss and was giving feedback about me that he didn't feel like I was senior enough to be leading that
mhm,
role. And there was that just a huge discrepancy in terms of like the feedbacks that my boss, who had 20, probably 15, 20 years more experience than I do
mhm,
in myself. And so it was interesting because the way my, again, like God bless her, like my boss handled it is instead of immediately, typically people would just pull you out of the account or sub somebody more senior or her to take it on. But instead, she actually, she talked to me about it and she was like, I know exactly what he's saying, but at the same time, the expectations are different, right? And so
mhm,
she gave me instead more exposure and like to different accounts and different kind of like just giving me advice throughout the thing, right? And
mhm.
sometimes, would even shadow and so that she could help me improve in my counsel. And to this day, I try to like pay that forward because there's nothing worse than getting that kind of feedback and then being hammered for it instead of like learning from it and growing. And so I feel like just surrounding myself with people that actually do support and empower you and truly your ally, right? Not just for when it's
Mm,
convenient for them or they're trying to manage up, I think was the lesson for me. And so I
that's
really
so
try to
beautiful.
do that also myself for others.
Oh, that's really beautiful. You're right. It makes me think of sports. Actually, I think of my sons who play sports, right? And if they make if they make a mistake on the basketball court, let's say they make a mistake, he's had coaches that would pull him like immediately. You make a mistake, pull him, right? And what would happen is every time he go on the court, it was like he was so worried about making a mistake that he just got worse and worse, right? The next year he had a different coach. And if the coach saw a mistake or something, he might, if there's something he might pull you off, have a quick talk, and then send you back out, right?
Hmm.
So that you can learn from it. And he just kept getting better and better and better. And it was so interesting to see how the way you can treat someone, the same exact person, same skill set, can absolutely impact their performance and how well they do. I mean, it's like, what is the saying? If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them we help them become what they are capable of becoming. I love that, and that's what your manager did, basically. Um,
Absolutely, yeah. And I think people also respond differently, right, to different kind of mm, like feedback and management styles. And some people, positive reinforcement is the ways that they grow. There are some people that, when they get challenged or be like, oh, I'll show you kind of thing, right? And so I think just my manager too, like knew how I was and
mm,
probably, and I at that time we were working for like a couple of years already. And so you can kind of tell like how this person would perform their best. And so
yes.
you kind of like tune to like that and, try to coach them in that way as well. So,
So important. Really. I mean, that's a great point too, because we all do react differently to different kinds of feedback. And it makes me think of a piece of advice that someone else had given, a podcast guest had given, saying that every time they have new people come on board, any new team members, they do a sheet where it's like how to best work with me, if you will, which is basically just telling you about your personality, right? As the manager, she'll give it to the new people who come on her team so they understand her own personality. Like, don't read into this. This is just how I am about this.
oh, I like
And
that.
then she also asks for it from the new teammates so that she can learn about how best to deal with them. And it's a good way to start. So yeah, that makes me think of that. It's a really good way to deal with team members and just be cognizant of how we all learn and process information in different ways. So yeah, it's very helpful. You have really worked with some great companies and you have consistently moved your way up through the ranks. I'm wondering if there's anything that has helped you either land your roles or get your promotions. Is there anything that has given you that little extra step that you could share with other people?
Yeah. I mean, I think. there are a couple of things. One, and people always say like, oh, build your network and all of that. I think a lot of comms people in general are actually introverted extroverts, right? Like,
Mhm.
or
Oh, yes.
extroverted introverts, which is in my case that, right? Like where I have to like muster that, like prepare and like be mentally prepared for the meetings and all of that. And I think just in general, cultivating relationships is obviously a good thing, but not under the guise of just doing it because you need to, right? Like really have
Right.
those connections even before you need them, but just be authentically like interested, right? Like genuinely
Mhm.
interested in keeping in touch with people. I think it's obviously like just one general advice that everybody probably gives and receives. But I actually like one of your recent podcasts. I couldn't agree more. He mentioned that being vocal about really where what you want and where you want to go, which is I think half the time we tend to, underestimate like just being vocal about what
Right.
you need or what you want. And so this was like mid-career too. I am not a self-promoter. I just do the work and hope that my managers, and I've been lucky to have a lot of amazing managers and mentors that just recognize the amount of work that you
Mhm.
put in without having to like talk up myself, right?
Yeah.
But there are points in time, obviously, that you need to speak up and ask. And I was fortunate enough, like this one agency that I worked at, that I was actually being recruited by another
Mm.
agency through a referral from a New York Times reporter that I was close to and was working with, and which is obviously in itself is like a huge kind of favor. So I took the dinners and the meetings because I figured like, why not, right? At that time, I loved my team and I really didn't want to make a move, but I figured, it's worth taking those calls and those meetings. And so
Yeah.
when I finally got an offer, I really didn't want to leave my team, right? But I also didn't want my manager to feel like I was just doing it as leverage. But Julie, I can't even say like the offer was just so much more than,
Mhm.
and we all know like in the agency side, like
Yes.
it's the experience that you gain, right?
Yeah.
And so we're willing to like I loved my clients, I loved my team, but it was just impossible to ignore the fact that, hey, you know what? It would hit me in six figures before I turned 30. So I'm like, I talked to my direct, like my team manager at that point, and I said, here's the thing, right? Like I wasn't seeking this out. I didn't apply. Of course, I took the meetings and the dinners and the lunches, but um, here's the offer. And she was like, oh boy, like that's more than what I make. Right. Like, and so, but she was like, obviously, I love you. Like, I wanted to stay. And I said, and I
Mhm.
understand if you can't match or beat it. Right. But she actually went to our founders and like got it. And she was willing to get
Amazing.
paid less than she was like, I'll figure out myself, but I really, I value in this team. And so I stayed, right? Because she
Amazing.
was able to, which what I'm saying is like there are those moments where I was just going to give notice and, like, oh, it's a good opportunity. You're probably not going to be able to match it. But like the fact that I had that direct and honest conversation with her enabled
Yes.
both of us to win in the end, right?
Yes.
Because of course she also got a promotion. It's like ridiculous to, and we also, for everybody, it kind of like elevated everyone else as well because we saw that what the market was willing to pay for our caliber or level. And so everybody else also benefited. So I
Yes.
think just in general, being truthful and speaking up for what you want and what you can, you believe in.
Absolutely. Open conversation, open, honest conversation is like a bedrock to success, really. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and we so often don't do it. And not only in career, but in life. I mean, we hold ourselves back. And there is so much beauty that happens when we're just open and honest and have those conversations. And here's the thing, when you have those conversations with your manager, one of two things will happen. Either they can work with you to get where you need to be, or they can't work with you to get where you need to be. And both sides is very valuable information to have and to know. Either way, having that information, having those conversations then allows you to make whatever decisions are going to be best for you. But you're right. If you don't have those conversations, you could make decisions that maybe they aren't the best decisions just because you don't have all the information. You didn't have those conversations or what have you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I think it's a great example because I think a lot of times people are scared to have those open, honest conversations. And so hearing stories like this helps take away some of that fear and realize that there is a lot of great things that happen on the other side of honesty. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, I mean, again, it really depends also. And I recognize it, especially now, like just given what's happening in our macro environment, there's a lot of like, you can't always have those kinds of conversations. And I'm so leaders that have been really lucky to have leaders that just empower and really true, genuinely just are, like just theme first.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. And here's the thing, when you come in with an offer that can have different situations depending on who your manager is. And what as a recruiter, I tell candidates when candidates are talking to me and they're looking to make a change, and I'm always wondering, well, why are you looking to make a change? What's happening? What's going on? Just what's driving you here, right? And if I hear that there's things that a company could do to make them happy, then I will tell them, like, look, before you get an offer, go talk to your boss now. Go talk to them. Find out, to let them know what it is you need, what it is that you want, what kind of path you want to go in. See if they can give you what you need now before you go find something else. And if they can, great. And if they can't, then one way or the other. But it's always great to have those you don't need to have an offer. In fact, I suggest going without the offer. Have the conversation first without the offer if possible. Because like you said, it depends on the manager. And sometimes when you come in with the offer, and some managers aren't going to be as emotionally elevated, and because that can trigger,
right.
that could trigger some things in some people who may not have as high of an
Absolutely.
EQ.
For sure. And I'm sure, you've experienced this as a recruiter too, where, some managers take resignations the wrong way, right? Like
Hmm.
where it's
Absolutely.
almost like, oh, then, goodbye kind of thing. So
Yes, exactly.
sometimes I think that's the root of why sometimes there's no transparency, or you feel
Hmm.
like you're like, oh, blindsided because maybe it's a lack of sharing, or maybe because of
Hmm.
those kinds of things where, like all of a sudden your contributions are minimized just because you gave notice, like that.
Exactly.
So I think we
Exactly.
celebrate the time and, like all everything that you've done as a team within the company and celebrate the next step in your career. But something
Yeah.
doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah, yeah. So you do need to know who you're dealing with. But yes, if you're feeling like there's something that they could do to make you happy, I always tell people go talk to them, have those conversations without the offer, see what can happen. And then, later on, if you get that offer, you can always go have another conversation if you need to. But
That's good advice. Yeah.
so yeah, so really that's really great advice. So overall, thank you for sharing that. And before you go, I always love to ask people because I'm really passionate about feeding our minds in a very proactive way, especially in this day and age. I mean, we're just getting bombarded with so much information, and so much of it does not serve us or help us in any way, shape, or form. So I love to know, is there anything that you have read, watched, or listened to that has had a positive impact on you that could potentially help others as well?
Yeah, actually, it's right on, like along the lines of what you just talked about. I just finished reading a book called Why Simple Wins. I know it's not the newest,
Ooh.
but it's by Lisa Bodell. And, in tech and in general in our lives, right? I feel like jobs have been made so complicated over the last few
Mhm.
years, right? And I always look back at like the best teams that I've had in my career and the best jobs. It's usually when everybody in the team doesn't make things difficult for each other, right? Like where it's
Mhm.
just simple. And that's kind of like what the book talks about, right? Like it was funny because one of the data points that it pointed out was that I think an average manager has actually less than like 6.5 or 7 hours of uninterrupted work time, like to get the actual work done because of all of the meetings and all of the like everything that we have to go
So
through,
many
right?
things,
To
right.
review everything. And so if only we could simplify things that would make our lives, like just work professional lives easier. And just in general as comms professionals too, right? Like it's the simplicity in our language that actually gets across even better. And so not just for work, making it simple, but in our messaging and whatever we say, I think it's applicable to, or at least that's where my mind went when I was reading everything. But yeah, Why Simple Wins is such a great book. And especially for struggling to, for those in jobs where there's like endless kind of, approvals and
Mhm.
reviews and everything that need to get done, or 40 requirements of like 40-page PowerPoint presentations to, to get one rec up. So I think it's a really good read for everybody in tech right now.
Fantastic. I'm curious, was there a suggestion in there on how to simplify that stuck with you in either your career or your life?
I think just in general, asking yourself is like, is this a requirement right now? Right. Like, and so
Mhm.
in one of the examples that she gave, like all of those meetings that we just get invited to, right? Like
Right.
you as yourself, like, okay, do I really need to, one, if you're sending the meeting yourself, right? Like, does this need to be a meeting? Or, do I
Yes.
need all of these people, 15 people in this meeting? Or could it be an email? Or, could it have a smaller audience? So I think
Mhm.
even those kind of like small steps is important. And us recognizing just because I'm not present in this meeting doesn't mean I'm not going to be involved in the decisions, or it doesn't mean that I don't care about a specific project. So I think that's an important
Right.
recognition. Yeah.
Yes. Really, really good insight. I love that. And so simple, and you know what? This is I agree. I have been going back to the simple things, back to the basics a lot. And because they are incredibly powerful. And a lot of times when things aren't working, that's kind of where you need to go. Just to go back to those basics, go back to the simple, recalibrate, and get back on the path. So I love it. Sylvie, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, I'm going to throw out my last final question just to hear what you have to say. What are you sure of in life?
I am sure that I like just in general or
Yeah. I just love this question because really, like when you think about it, like, what are you sure of? Like when you strip away, like, no, really, what are you sure of? And so it's a really interesting question to hear
yeah.
what answers people come up with.
I think the only thing that I'm certain of is that, things will change, right? Like things
Yeah.
always change and, you can only be sure of yourself and what you're going to do and how you react to things. So,
Yeah.
just have better control over your reactions and what you care about day to day.
So good. You know what? And on that, actually, I'm going to ask one more question because it is really, this is an important topic, how you control your reactions. Is there anything that you've learned that helps you control your reactions? Because really, this is something I think so many of us really need right now.
Oh, for sure. Well, I think one of the things that I feel like I've honed through the years when I'm in front of a stakeholder or a C-level leader, I I just try to like pause and keep that calm. And so I don't know if that's like a superpower or not, but like you
Yes.
just have to learn to again, like you can only control so many things, right? And so
Mhm.
focus on those that you can and the rest of it you just gotta let go.
That's great. No, the power of the pause is a absolute superpower. And really, that is key right there, right? I mean, so much can change if we all just harnessed the power of the pause before we reacted.
Exactly. Like just don't react in haste, right? Because
Yeah.
nothing ever like good comes of that. And
Mhm.
another actually that reminds me of just one last tip that I've learned through the years also from one of my great managers is that every time if you write an email in haste, right? Like responding to
Mhm.
something like something at work that you're not happy about or whatever, sleep on it. Don't send it
Right.
right at that moment, right? Give it a day, 2 days, reread it because oftentimes, your emotions, of course, shift and what you want to say changes and you can soften it. And really, every time you sleep on an email, there will be something else that you want, would you rather like right day. And I think it will be, yeah, it's career saving in a lot of ways.
Yes. I was just gonna say that. This advice could be life career changing for many people. Can at least save them a lot of heartache.
Yes,
So
yes.
so Sylvie, thank you so much for joining us on the Career Wonderlist podcast. This has been wonderful, and I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you, Jolie.
Thank you for joining us on the Career Wanderlust podcast. If you find value in learning from others, give us a like and subscribe. If you're looking to grow your communications, marketing, public relations, or sales and biz dev team with the best talent and quickly, check us out at paradigmstaffing.com and submit a request. We are wishing you a most successful and fulfilling career. Until next time.